All right. Well, anyway, let's talk about cessation cases.
All right, let's talk about cessation cases.
So the scenario where a client gets approved for disability, and then they're receiving disability for weeks or for months and for years, and then Social Security just cuts off their benefits. So before we actually get into that, how valid of a concern is it when a client is saying, is Social Security going to be checking on me? Are they going to be reviewing the case? How valid is that? How likely is it that Social Security will really cut you off benefits?
Yeah, it waxes and wanes with as the political, you know,
Right.
powers that be. Oh, we've got to crack down on people who shouldn't be on disability, and therefore we're going to do what they call a CDR, which is a continuing disability review. Um, if you have earnings that show up, it will almost always trigger a CDR. Um, if you're young, you can expect several times. If you stay on disability, you can expect several times every 3 years, maybe every 5 years, but every 3 years, they're gonna just to see if you've improved, and that's just written in the statute. So for younger individuals, it's that don't have a certain impairment. Like if they've got metastatic cancer, they wouldn't give them a diary for 3 to 5 years. But if they're anything else, that's a fairly treatable condition, or there's a chance that their condition could improve. And for younger people, there's always that chance. I mean, that's just the way it's
Yeah.
written into the statute. That hey, you're 25, you're 35 years old. There's a chance that you might get better, and so we want to make sure that if you do, we cut you off. So my long answer to your short question is it's probable, it's likely if you're a younger individual. Now, when you hit 52 and a half, I don't know what's magic about that age, but 52 and a half, if you are approved and you're already 52 and a half, they'll give you what they call a permanent diary, which is really a 7-year diary. But you got to think about that. If you're 52 and a half and they give you a 7-year diary, you're going to be, pretty much pushing 60. And it's unheard of for somebody that age, unless they go to work, unless earnings trigger a review,
Right.
for them to get a continuing disability review. But yeah, if you're a younger individual, you can expect it. It's not a forever thing, unless you have an impairment that they just know isn't going to get any better. Some of those would be an adult with really low IQs, intellectual deficits, autism. Those are things that rarely, treatment rarely
They're
will
usually
cause.
usually more consistent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they rarely will improve with treatment. But most, if you had a back condition, you have bipolar or any other psychological condition that waxes and wanes, then you're likely going to get a continuing disability review.
And so those reviews, that's not at the just random discrepancy of Social Security. That actually is written into like the law, is they will do these reviews periodically if you're a younger age and you have those types of conditions.
Yeah, it's written into the law. The problem is that, is it random? It's not supposed to be, but it ends up being random. And again, it's because of staffing shortages. I think we've talked about this in an earlier podcast. When I started with disability in 1991, there was a big lecture that we all got at the beginning of our employment. Keep in mind that Social Security here in 1991 is staffed at 1974 levels. And here we are 34 years later, and they're basically still staffed at 1974 levels.
Yeah.
So, the population has increased. The complexity of the program has big time increased. And so you have more and more and more and more people needing services, and Social Security, even though they have offset that with a lot of the work that they used to do, that a Social Security employee would handle your application, paper application, they would actually file the application, they would process the application. All that's done online now. I mean, and the claimant or the representative is now responsible for that. So a lot of that has been offloaded onto the customer, as Social Security calls them, the client, the claimant. But still, I mean, it's ridiculous the amount of work that these folks have to do. So the way they do that is they just kind of shift caseloads, and they always have shifted caseloads. And in this particular political atmosphere, they might say, well, it is really, really important for us to work through a backlog, and therefore we're just going to work through cases, and we love that because that's our clients are best served when that happens. But then they have some political climate where, well, we believe that Social Security recipients, there's too many of them, and some of them are, have scammed this, have gamed the system, and there's some scams. Whenever there's a scandal, it'll usually be one claimant, one representative, maybe a physician who Social Security contracts with, and that one scandal that'll be in a remote part of the country, let's just say West Virginia, and the entire program will be affected by it. And they'll just draw back everything, all the claimants are trying to get something for nothing. All the representatives are charlatans. We have to do this. They get crazy, and it's because there's a spotlight put on them whenever there's a scandal. The press will, if this has happened here in blah blah blah, Nowheresville, it's got to be happening everywhere else, which is not true at all. But that's kind of the way that a bureaucracy that is punted like a football, and it always has been since I've been involved in 34 years. It's always been like that. So there will be times when we've got to do CDRs, and this happened, we're in 2025, I think right before COVID, so 18 or 19. We're doing a lot of CDRs. You just be expecting it. We're going to up the number of CDRs that we're doing. Make sure that these people aren't getting benefits that they shouldn't be getting.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So they just overcorrect because they feel like, according to the press, they have to crack down to kind of, yeah, that makes sense.
Sure.
Typical government stuff, like one instance, and then they blow it up like, no, this isn't happening. Let's change the entire program.
Yeah.
So no one thinks this is happening.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, how many times, even in your tender years, how many times have you heard that Social Security is not going to be around when you retire?
Yeah.
I'm still a few years away from retirement, and they're already saying a reduction of benefits in, 2034 or something like that. And they've just been playing with that football, tossing it back and forth for the longest time. And that's what they do. I mean, it is a very large program that affects millions of people, and therefore there's some power in them being able to play with it and say, well, hey, I'm going to hold back some money on this funding, or we need to give more money to the Social Security Administration, or we need to shore up the trust fund, or we need to do this. They're doing all these things, and depending on the political climate, it's a great thing or it's an awful thing.
Yeah.
The best time for a Social Security claimant and the best time for a Social Security disability representative is when they're just not, they're not hot to do something. They're just doing their job. They're just going along.
Yeah.
They're just processing the cases, getting the decisions out as quickly as they possibly can, and treating everybody like a person. That's when things are great. Things are horrible when they're trying to make a political point, or they're doing all sorts of investigations or reviews because there
Because
has
this
to
one guy.
yeah, if that one guy did it, there have to be tons of it. And that really, there was a scandal like that. It's almost 20 years old now, and it's still affecting the program. It's amazing to me. They should be ashamed, the movers and shakers of Social Security, that they still make policy based on a scandal that, absolutely happened under their nose. I mean, when it came out, there were whistleblowers who were the ones who helped it come about, and people knew. Lots of people knew. In fact, I think one of the people that went to jail was a judge that knew and therefore threatened the whistleblower, which, by the way, that's felonious behavior, and he went to jail. I don't know for how long, but I mean, it's a political program, and I wish it wasn't. But I mean, welcome to America.
Yeah. Well, if we just keep talking about how much I hate the government, we'll be here all night. So let's get back on track for CDRs. Is that what they're called, CDRs?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are all of the reasons that they would cut the benefits off? I mean, the two that I can think of is you went back to work full time, so you don't qualify technically.
Right.
Or for whatever reason, Social Security has concluded that you've improved to the point that you're no longer disabled. Are there any other reasons, or is that pretty much it?
No, for a CDR, I mean, a lot of times they would just cut you off not doing a CDR. I mean, if you went back to work and worked above the SGA substantial gainful activity level for a certain amount of time, then they cut you off. It's not really a CDR. They're just like, okay, you've returned to the work.
Yeah, right.
We're not going to do a review of your case. I mean, once we've talked about it before, the math don't lie.
Yeah.
You've returned to the workforce, so they would just cut the benefits. But that's not a CDR. CDR is, if there are earnings, but they're not disqualifying earnings. Something has changed though. So they didn't have any earnings, or they had really less earnings, but now they're not over the limit. But their earnings have either popped up or they've gotten higher. Therefore, it's not wrong for them to conclude that, something's changed and you've gotten better,
yeah.
You're able to work more hours, you're making more money. And then there is, like you said, is it just a random thing? Well, it's not supposed to be, but it is, where, you were supposed to get a review in 3 years and you've been on benefits for 8 years, and all of a sudden this CDR pops out. Well, why? Well, because they caught up and they're like, okay, we needed to do this a few years back. And nothing triggered it other than, you were 28 years old when you got put on disability. And now we're going to see, if your condition has stayed the same or it's gotten better. They don't really care if it's worsened, because it's worsened.
Yeah, it's not going to change anything.
Yeah. But so the main trigger, the ones that we see the most, are they just believe that it's time to look at your case and there's a possibility that you got better. Now, if they cease the case, and that's what they call it a cessation. It's a denial, but it's really a cessation because you've been on, and they're going to cut you off. They do it, I hesitate to say it, but they do it fairly gently. It's not, you're no longer disabled, boom, and your benefits quit. It's, you're no longer disabled, and therefore we're going to pay you for the next couple of months. And after that couple of months, if you don't appeal the decision, then we are ceasing you and you won't get any benefits. So you can appeal it, and this is the most, if our viewers don't get anything else out of this episode on cessation CDR cases, they have to get this. If you've paid any attention to any of our prior podcasts, you know that the appeal time frame, the deadline to file an appeal in almost all cases in Social Security is 60 days. That doesn't change in a CDR case. However, if you want your benefits to continue while you're appealing, you got 10 days to let them know. And if you don't tell them within 10 days that I want my benefits to continue, then the appeal will go on, but you're no longer going to be getting a check. So Keep in mind, it's really the only time I can think of where you got such a short time frame to actually make a plea to Social Security, and it's 10 days. You got 10 days from the time that they notify you, we're going to cease you, and well, I want my benefits to continue while you're undergoing the cessation. Most of the time, and the question that begs to be asked is, okay, well, what if I lose my appeal? Do I have to pay those benefits back? Sometimes, it's not always a no, and it's not always a yes. Most of the time, it's a no. You don't have to pay it back. But
would that be because they issue the overpayment, but then you file the waiver, or is there a scenario where they actually just don't issue an overpayment?
No, it's just a scenario where they don't issue the overpayment.
Okay, see, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and they can, and it's in the it's in all the paperwork that they send out. If you, and they'll warn you if you elect for, it's what they call benefit continuation. Okay, you're going through the appeal process, and you told us within 10 days that you wanted your benefits to continue. There's a chance that if we continue paying you through the appeals process, when that's done, and we uphold our denial, uphold our cessation, that we are indeed going to cut you off, you are obligated to pay that back. For whatever reason, we don't see that happen all the time. Okay. And once again, it's Social Security, so I can't tell you what happens. Normally, in an SSI case, I just don't see that they would go after you. I mean, you're not going to have anything anyway. If you're on SSI, you don't have any real income or resources for them to, we're going to get that overpayment back. SSDI, I think they'd probably come after you and issue you an overpayment. So you got to pay that back. And there are some, certainly some situations where they would be quite serious about getting that money back. But again, the main thing that you need to remember for this is that you got 10 days to elect for benefit continuation, or else your checks are going to stop while you're going through the appeal process.
Yeah, let's break that down a little bit more, because obviously the reason it's 10 days is because they want you to just miss it, because then you just it's only been 10 days, and then you're just out of luck. Yeah. So there's 10 days. There's 60 days to file the appeal. That's the exact same as a denial letter.
Sure.
And the letter that you get actually looks like a denial letter. It's the same way.
Yep.
If you disagree with our decision, you have 60 days to file an appeal. That's 60 days for the appeal. Separately, and this doesn't happen automatically if you file the appeal, you also have to opt into receiving benefits while it's under review. And that's what we're talking about. That's 10 days, right?
Correct.
Do you do that by mail? Do you call them?
Call them?
Yeah.
I would definitely call them. If you call them and do it by mail, or if you have access to a fax machine, obviously, if you're represented, if you're represented, your representative is probably going to fax it. My client elects for benefit continuation. Faxes, I know they're going out of style and stuff like that. Let me tell you, as an old school guy, faxes are wonderful. They come with a date stamp on them. I can verify that I sent, the Social Security office this on such and such a date. It shows that it was received. I'm sorry. We've got the best verification that's possible, other than a witness in your office seeing that you received it. So we still fax, because we want to make sure that there is a paper trail showing that it was delivered. But yeah. And the appeals process is different. So the cessation itself is kind of like an initial case. Somebody's looking at it. The criteria is a lot different, and I do want to go into that if you ask me about it. But the appeal process is different too, because at a normal case, lower level case, it goes initial, reconsideration, hearing, appeals counsel. In a cessation case, it would be like the initial review of the CDR, the continuing disability review. And if you appeal it, the recon level is actually before a hearing officer. It's not an ALJ, not an administrative law judge, but it's a hearing officer, an HO. I'll I'll keep the jokes to myself. But that hearing officer will literally hold a hearing. They're usually in the local office. I imagine they're by phone now, just like the ALJ hearings are. And the hearing officer will issue a decision which is strikingly similar to what an administrative law judge would issue. If you appeal that decision, then we're back basically on track the way it would be. So basically the reconsideration, it's still a reconsideration, but it's before a hearing officer instead of just the same claims examiner who looked at it the first time. And then when you get beyond that, it's the same, the appeals, the administrative law judge, and then the appeals council, and then federal court if you want to go crazy.
So what is the HO look like? Is it a hearing with the client, or
It is, and the representative.
so it's basically just another hearing?
I've attended several of them, yeah.
Okay. Is it
yeah.
around the same amount of time? Do they ask pretty much the same questions?
Yeah, it's, the hearings themselves before an administrative law judge are billed as informal conferences, and this one's the same way. The hearing officer is not a judge. They're just an employee of the disability determination section. Same people who do the initial and recon cases. The same pool of employees. It's a higher level, obviously, because you're not going to be an HO, a hearing officer, unless you've been there a long time and you have some experience under your belt. But so that's the big difference in the actual how these appeals progress throughout the system.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
All right. So let's say a client gets the letter that their benefits are being stopped, and then they opt into still receiving benefits, and they go through the whole process. How do we fit into that? Because I know our fees are really straightforward with normal cases, because it's the same for all representative. We don't have any upfront costs. We get 25% of the back pay up to a cap, which this year in 2025 is $9,200. But it's just back pay, 25% of the back pay. But I know our fees are a little bit different for CDR cases. So now if someone's listening and they're actually wanting to hire us and they're looking into that process, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, you won't see a lot of CDR cases represented. Certainly not at the initial level, because at the initial level, you can make a case that you don't need us. But even before a hearing officer, like I said, I've attended several of them, but usually we're contacted after the hearing officer has said, yeah, I agree, I'm going to uphold that cessation, and if you want to appeal it, you can go to the administrative law judge, the hearing level. And that's where we see them mostly. And the reason is this, and this is it's a harsh reality of continuing disability review cases. For us to get paid as representatives, like you said, the normal method is we get 25% of any back award you get with a cap. Well, let's say that you've elected for benefit continuation.
Yeah, there is no back
you
pay.
got denied, and you're getting a monthly check, and there's nothing accruing as far as back pay. So if I helped you out and we won the case, I have to get paid somehow. And that is really why a lot of claimants will not get representation until the hearing level. Because the way that most representatives, some actually will ask for a retainer. I never have and I never will. I think that's kind of a strange thing to do for somebody, a client of yours who's disabled. You got to come up with a pool of money, and I'll hold it. But anyway, so what happens is they do have to pay, and the agreement that is the most common is you're not going to get a quarter of any retro benefits that they have, because there is none. But you will ask them to pay you a quarter of their monthly check. Like I said, there's a reason that we don't see a lot of represented claimants at the
Yeah.
initial or the hearing officer level, because if they, their monthly benefit amount is $2,000, well, they have to write me a check for $500, and they have to write me that check every month that we're going through the system. And what happens is a representative will hold that in escrow. So it's money that I'm holding, but if I don't win your case, I return it all back to you if we get a denial. If I win the case, I keep it. That's my fee. Whatever I've accrued. And yes, I have won cases, after 2 months of work. So, it's, you only get 2 months of 2 months of a quarter benefits. But that's fine. I mean, that's the agreement. But that's hard. And it's really hard to, I don't want to say sell it, but it's hard to explain it and try to, convince a claimant that, I have staff, I have everybody in my company needs to make a living.
Yeah.
And that is the way that Social Security, that's the most common way that they're cool with it. They still have to approve my fee, by the way. And I don't know if we've talked about that before, but Social Security always has to approve a representative fee. I can't charge you whatever I want to charge you. And hey, it's just between you and me. Social Security doesn't need to get involved. But that doesn't happen. Social Security is always involved, and they always have to approve my fee. And if I ever was to get a fee, or any representative was ever to get a fee from somebody that Social Security did not approve, it would possibly, if not probably, lead to them being sanctioned.
Yeah.
We are supposed to make sure that our fee has been approved by Social Security. So, and that's no different in a cessation case. We would let Social Security know, because we submit our contract in every case to Social Security right out of the gate. One of the first documents we submit is, this is our fee agreement, and on a cessation case, it looks a little bit different. And then we would just hold that money until either a bad thing happens and we don't win your case, and I write you a check for all of it and you get it back. Or, I won your case, and whatever I have accrued is mine.
That's the fee.
That's my fee.
Yeah, I've run into that several times where I've spoken to a client for a case review. They're doing a CDR case, and they have opted into still receiving benefits. And I go over the fee structure. It's 25% of your monthly benefit while it's under review. It goes in escrow. I've run into that several times where they're offended by that, and I'm basically like, I get it.
Exactly.
I'm not going to try to sell that. I completely understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, it's different from like our normal fee, where you're not getting anything, and we're working in a contingency, so we're putting in hours and we're not getting any money at all, and everything works out for everybody, and therefore we get a percentage of whatever Social Security owed you for the time that we waited. 99.9% of our clients are cool with that. I'm cool with that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a whole different ballgame, though, if you have budgeted your life around your check,
Mm-hmm.
and some representative comes, hey man, I'll help you out, but you're going to have to pay me every single month, and it's going to be a quarter of your check. It is not lost on me that it's severe. It's hard.
Yeah, we know what we're asking.
Yeah. And but it's the only way that we can actually afford to take these kinds of cases.
Mm-hmm.
And I love CDR cases. When I worked for disability, before I was a supervisor, that I was a CDR examiner. And the experience I got just in the period that I was doing CDR cases is probably the best experience that has helped me being a representative. Because in a CDR case, you have to look at what they call the CPD, the comparison point decision, and it's almost always an administrative law judge decision. So here I am, working for the government in a job, and I'm reading these legal documents. Why did this judge find this guy disabled, and then you read through all this stuff and you get a kind of a flow of, okay, well, this is why this decision is this way. And then when I jumped ship, in 2004 and started presenting the case, I'm like, okay, the judges are looking for this. This is important to the judges. I see it in the CDR case that I've worked, years and years ago, and they approved the case for this reason, and therefore, I've been able to use that in my practice. But CDR cases, I love taking them. It's easier to win a CDR case than it is to win a normal, regular, I'm just filing for disability case. Why is that? So we've talked about this before. The burden to prove that a client or claimant is disabled is 100% on the client and the representative. Now it shifts a little bit in some hearing instances, and we can talk about that in some other podcast. But for the most part, it's on us. We got to, you have to prove you're disabled. The burden of proof is on you. Why are you disabled? What do your medical records show? What's your doctor say? And, Mr. Groves, make the argument. What's the legal argument? Why do you think Mr. So-and-so is disabled? The burden is on us. In a CDR case, if I'm arguing, you should not have ceased Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith is still disabled. So you have to prove to me how he got better. And you got to do the same thing that I had to do years ago when if I'm handling the same client, which we do sometimes. You made me prove that he was disabled. I did. You got to prove that he's no longer disabled. And we've talked about the 5 steps. There's, the sequential evaluation, for proving disability, 5 steps. Well, there's 8, I believe there's 8 to prove medical improvement has occurred. And that's the burden's on them. Social Security has to prove, okay, not only have they gotten better, that's something that, it's not as hard to prove. Okay, well, they got a little bit better, or the medication's working better than it did, or technology's improved, and they can have this procedure, and they had it, and they got a little bit better. Well, you're not done yet. Now you got to prove that they got better to the point where they can work full time. Well, they can make SGA. Man, that burden, that's such a tough burden, and I feel sorry for some judges who want to uphold a decision that is very, very hard to uphold.
Yeah, they actually have to work pretty hard on it.
I'm like, first of all, biology is always going to be on your side, because you are not as healthy, you are not as spry, you are not as able to recover as quickly when you're 48 than you were when you're 38. Age, biology absolutely works against you health-wise, but works for you in a disability case, certainly a CDR case. Okay. And we got the passage of time. Really, you're going to sit there and tell me that they got better? Now, sometimes it's actually true. I mean, there are cases to where, I see that they got better here.
Probably specific conditions, like if they had a stroke and it took them 24 months to recover, but they did actually recover.
Sure. Yeah, and well, stroke is one of those where the likelihood of recovery is incredibly great. But yeah, there could be some other things, some medications. I'm thinking of lupus and MS and a lot of your autoimmune disorders. Medication effectiveness has gone through the roof. In the 21 years I've been practicing, so I could see that. HIV. HIV was it was absolutely a death knell when it first happened, and there's a good chance that you're just going to lead a fairly normal life for the length of time that most of us live. You're going to have HIV, and you're going to have take some precautions and not live foolishly. But those kinds of things. So you had, medical advances in medical technology. Certainly, that could make the difference in these kinds of cases. Diabetes, diabetes treatment has gotten a lot better. And then there's changes in the way Social Security even looks at things. When I first started, obesity was actually an impairment that had its own listing. You don't see that anymore. There's certain things that medical advances have made obesity. They still have to consider it, but it can't be considered on its own. It has to be considered with some other kind of impairment. So there are cases that I would look at, and because I review all our cases, but this one's, I think Social Security's got a point on this one. But for the vast majority of CDR cases that come across my desk, I'm like, I want to see how they proved that you got better. I want to see the exam that they sent you to that's so much better than the one that they sent you to, 8 years ago when they approved you. Because it's very, very unlikely that the medical records are going to show got better.
Right. Okay. So our fee structure is a little wonky, but if you're okay with it, we love taking CDR cases because it's easier to prove. And then also important to note, so the 10 days that you have to opt into receiving benefits while it's under appeal, if you don't do that, but you want to hire us the same way for the appeal, or maybe you've already appealed it and then you want to hire us, then our fee structure is the exact same.
It's always the same.
Because from that, you're accruing back pay in that amount of time.
Yeah. And of course, I think every representative would say it's not practical for you from a financial standpoint.
Yeah.
Not to choose benefit continuation. I mean, you got bills to pay, and you've got years and years of a disability check that you have, that's your budget now. And so, I need it to continue. But if you didn't continue, it makes it a lot easier for us because it just goes to the way that every other disability claim is as far as our pay structure goes.
Right. Okay. And then let's talk about not a cessation case, but they cut off someone's benefits and they didn't appeal it, and it's past the deadline, and now it's 6 months, or it's a year, or it's 5 years later. I've had a lot of people talk to me about this as well, and they'll say, well, I received benefits for years, but they cut me off, and it's something that happened like a year or two ago. A lot of people think that they can basically just pick it up where they left off, but after those 60 days, you have to start all over again, right?
Brand new claim.
Completely new claim, goes through the exact same process, right?
Yeah. So, there's two things, in your question that I want to address. The first one is, if you've missed the deadline, you're not appealing anymore. Now you're just starting all over. However, if you did draw, a few years back, depending on why you drew, that evidence could certainly help you. Once again, even though it wouldn't be a CDR case, you wouldn't be showing medical or trying to show that there was no medical improvement, or you wouldn't be really trying to prove something that you would in a CDR case. But if there is favorable information, favorable medical records, that how favorable were they? Well, disability approved you. The Social Security approved you years ago. And of course, what we'd want to know is what's changed. Why'd they cut you off? Well, they cut me off because I went to work. Okay, all right. Well, there you go. So, or you went to jail. You can't draw benefits when you're incarcerated, especially on SSI cases. Or you just moved and forgot to let them know that this is my new address. I mean, that happens, believe it or not. And then you don't get with them. You don't get everything squared away, and you got to start all over. Well, you do have to start all over, but it would be completely irresponsible of a representative not to say, I want to see what you're put on. Mm-hmm. It was 8 years ago. Are you really going to use 8-year-old medical records? I will use them to help.
If it led to an approval, then
I'll use them to help. If
Yeah.
Social Security approved them on those things 8 years ago, I want to see what's different now. It'd be wonderful to be able to compare things, because you got a great argument right there. He had problems with public contact back then, and you guys felt that he would be markedly limited in dealing with supervisors and coworkers. And new exam says that he has problem with public contact, but you say that he can work with supervisors and coworkers all of a sudden. That doesn't wash. It'd make a really good argument. So, but yeah, you have to start all over, and that's the big thing. But if you had drawn before, those records could be useful in an argument.
Yeah. I also want to point out how important it is to file the appeal if they've cut off your benefits. If you are SSDI, you're receiving SSDI, and that might jeopardize your eligibility for the entire program, right? If you were receiving SSDI, you haven't worked in 8 years, and you were receiving benefits. I don't know exactly how that works, so I'll ask you first. But say you're receiving benefits for like 12 years, so you haven't worked in like 12 or 15 years,
Right.
and then they cut you off. Is your date last insured that far in the past, or is it how exactly do they look at that? If you start a new case, you don't appeal it, but you start a new case.
There are cases to where I believe that they will extend a DLI, but in that scenario that you just described, where you just missed the deadline, I think it's extremely dangerous, because the date less insured, it can be extended obviously with new earnings.
Yeah.
If you even part-time earnings.
Yeah, if you went back to work,
Sure.
then that's a different story.
But
Yeah.
if you were just drawing benefits for a long, long time, and they cut you off for whatever reason, and then you didn't appeal it, at the end of the day, they're stuck with that window, that date last insured window, and it's definitely going to be in the past. But I think there are some provisions. I'd have to get back with you on that to give you a definitive answer on that. We don't see that very often. Of course, with a represented claimant, we're going to make sure that appeal is filed timely.
Yeah.
So,
But either way, you should definitely file the appeal.
always.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about another thing that goes along with that commonly is an overpayment due? How do you feel about overpayments? Because a lot of clients will come to me wanting us to take their case, maybe it's a new case, like maybe it's that exact scenario that I just described where they didn't file the appeal, and now it's like a year later. Yeah, I was receiving benefits before they cut me off. I ask them if there's an overpayment due. They say yes. It's like $15,000. If they get approved for benefits, I mean, what does Social Security do about that overpayment? They're not going to receive benefits if they have an outstanding overpayment, are they?
If they receive them, there was a move made fairly recently that I think there was a hue and cry that basically tanked it. But Social Security was basically going to take chunks of your benefits that you were due now to pay an overpayment, where they used to take it in very small payments, like $50 a month or something like that. And they were just going to say, okay, well, you got a $3,000 overpayment. Your monthly check is $1,200. We're going to take $1,200. We'll take $1,200. Then we're going to take the last, what would that be? $600.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd be 2 months of no benefits and 1 month of really reduced.
Pretty aggressive, yeah.
That was going to happen. And, representative community and some other advocates are like, that is exactly the opposite reason for why we have the program in the first place. So I think they've deep sixed that, I hope, because it was something that was actually being seriously considered. But, to get to your other question about overpayments, there are overpayment cases. My specialty is in being able to prove that you're disabled due to a medical condition. And there are representatives who take overpayment cases, and they do great work. and I would refer you to them, but I don't do that. I don't take overpayment cases. They're complicated. I will give SSI claimants advice on, how to ask for a waiver. And SSDI people can ask for a waiver too. Problem is that SSI claimants, by virtue of being an SSI claimant, don't have the income and resources that somebody that has been able to work and amass some a house and some property and stuff like that, maybe even a decent bank account. It's really hard to get Social Security to agree. Okay, we'll waive the overpayment, for you, when you have all this stuff that you could actually, pay it back with. Whereas an SSI person, it's like, I can't pay it back. You also want to make sure that Social Security is correct in the overpayment. Correct in two ways. One, that you were overpaid, and two, in the amount that they're saying you were overpaid. You gotta absolutely hold their feet to the fire, make sure that the numbers that they're coming up with are accurate, because a lot of times they're not. For example, let's say that you sent in here's one that happens all the time. You sent in a note that your husband passed away. He was on disability. And every month they're direct depositing your dead husband's disability check in your bank. And then they wake up and, either they get notified, because they have clearinghouses on everything. We've talked about the earnings clearinghouse that they run. So-and-so, there's been a death, he was on benefit. And they misplace, or they claim they never got it, and you reported it, but they kept sending you that money. It goes into your bank by direct deposit, which means literally that if you wanted to return it, you would have been writing them a personal check every month, which is the most asinine thing that I could imagine. But anyway, that's what they expect. So they slap you with an overpayment. And for the sake of argument, we'll say that the overpayment amount is correct. It's 4 months that you were overpaid on your dead husband's disability check, and you shouldn't have gotten it. Okay, so you owe them 4 months of your husband's disability amount. However, whose fault was it? And a great argument is, I had nothing to do with this overpayment. In fact, I did everything right. I reported the change that would have resulted in those benefits not being erroneously paid to me, and yet you sent them to me anyway. So that would be a great argument to make, and be a waiver. I can't pay this back.
Mm-hmm.
The money was in my account. I reported what I was supposed to report. I don't know what else I was supposed to do. So you could make an argument like that, and I think most of the time that argument would, Social Security would be like, oops, and waive the overpayment.
Yeah, that's pretty much how I've understood the whole waiver is. You're telling Social Security that it's not my fault that you guys overpaid me, and also I don't have the money to repay it.
Right.
It's pretty difficult to make the argument that you don't have the money to repay it when you've gone back to work full time.
Right.
Or if you're receiving, $4,000 from the VA, because then it's like, yeah, actually you do, and they can see that.
Sure.
So to your point, SSI cases are, I'm sure, a lot easier to get that waiver. The form itself, is it just a government form that they get off
It's
SSA?
a waiver
and then
form, or you can write it on a piece of notebook paper.
Oh, yeah?
You don't have to get crazy formal with them on that. You do want to make sure that you have some kind of verification that you sent it and that they received it.
Mm-hmm.
Certified mail, it's like $5. Spend the $5. Please spend the $5.
Right.
Or have it faxed. Fax is paper trail.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, well, those are all of my questions. Are there any other tips that you want to add to cessation cases?
Only one, and it's the same kind of advice we give all of our clients, advice that you ask, people who are seeking help, and that is ongoing treatment, ongoing treatment, ongoing treatment. Let's say that Social Security ceases your case, and they cease your case because they just sent you to a consultative exam, and you'd seen your doctor 4 times total since you got approved 8 years ago. That's a real hard argument for me to say, yeah, they're so disabled, and they're trying so much to get better that they saw the doctors once every 2 years.
Yeah.
Horrible argument. Just because you get put on disability. In fact, when you get put on disability after a wait for an SSDI case or immediately for an SSI case, you got medical coverage. There's really no excuse for you not to be in ongoing treatment. And it will really, really damage your case if Social Security has to send you to a consultative exam because you haven't been to anybody in a year or 2. And their doctors are going to do what their doctors do 90% of the time. They know who butters their bread, and they're going to say, okay, well, Social Security's paying me a couple $100 for this exam. They're looking for me to say that they can get off the table fine, they can squat, they can walk, they can do this, they can do that. There's your evidence. And Social Security say, medical improvement hasn't occurred, and we're going to cease you. And what evidence do you have to the contrary? Nothing. You haven't seen anybody. So that's my tip. Make sure, if you're a disabled person, you need to be getting treatment anyway. If you're a disabled person who's on disability, you got no excuses now because you have medical coverage, and you need to be, for your own health, for your own sake, try to get better. Seek treatment so you can try to get better. Try to figure out what's going on with you. Try new medications. Are there new procedures? Now I can afford procedures. Couldn't afford procedures before I got put on disability, but now I can. It makes it really hard for me to argue that, they didn't get any better at all. Well, Mr. Groves, what's the evidence that shows that in the case file? Well, there's no evidence in the case file, but my client said, it's
he's right here. Just ask him.
It's a terrible argument. It goes back to one, not what I believe, but what I can prove.
Yeah, it's really the same point. If you're applying for disability, there better be a paper trail of your condition. Because if you see your doctor every week or every month or every couple of months, and then you can look at the span of a couple of years, you'll see if you're actually disabled, right? And you usually, when you have some kind of degenerative disease, it's a chronic degenerative disease, you're going to see a paper trail of bad, and then a little bit worse, and then a little bit worse, and then a little bit, and then a little bit worse. Sure. But it's not going to show substantial improvements if you're actually disabled.
Right.
And then the same thing with if you're receiving benefits. It's really hard to make the case that's like, I'm so disabled that I can't work, but I haven't seen a doctor since I was working on getting approved 6 years ago.
Yeah.
It's like, especially like I don't know how well, if they actually look at it this way, but if you're in treatment all the time to get approved, and then you get approved and you're just like, all right, never seen a doctor again.
Yeah.
That's pretty hard.
That's not a case I would take, for one. I can't make that argument. I will make a great argument if you give me the evidence to make the great argument with. But you ain't seeing anybody, I can't make a great argument. So.
Yep. All right. Let's leave it at that.
All right.